Close your eyes and imagine this. You open your eyes in a world without electricity, without internet, without even the concept of instant communication. The year is 1825, exactly 2 centuries ago. The air smells of wood smoke and damp earth. Outside, a horse snorts in the cold morning mist. The creak of a wagon wheel echoes down the muddy street. You were standing in the United States, but not the United States you know. This is a country of only 24 states, barely stretching beyond the Mississippi River. The rest is wild. Dense forests, roaring rivers, vast plains where the wind howls for miles without hitting a single building. It is a young nation, just 49 years old, still figuring out its identity. Its people are divided by class, race, and geography. In the East, cities like New York and Philadelphia bustle with merchants, immigrants, and politicians. In the West, pioneers carve out lives in the wilderness, facing hunger, wild animals, and the threat of conflict with native nations who have lived on these lands for thousands of years. This was a time when life expectancy barely reached 40, when disease could take you in days, when war was never far away, and when the unknown lay just beyond the next ridge. But behind the history taught in schools lies another story, one of secret maps, forgotten creatures, cures that defy science, and daily struggles that modern Americans could barely imagine. Tonight, we travel back to that world, not as distant observers, but as time travelers. And you may never look at your own time the same way again. In 1825, the United States looked nothing like the map we know today. Imagine a parchment map on a tavern wall, the Atlantic coast drawn in detail, but the West a blur of guesswork. The Mississippi River marked the Great Divide. Beyond it lay vast territories under Native American control, claimed on paper by the US, Britain, Spain, or Mexico, but in reality ruled by those who could survive there. The newest marvel was the Erie Canal, opened that very year. Stretching 363 miles from Albany to Buffalo, it linked the Hudson River to the Great Lakes. This engineering feat cut travel time drastically, allowing goods and people to move at speeds never before imagined. Towns along the canal exploded in growth, fortunes were made overnight, and New York City began its transformation into America's commercial capital. Yet for all the progress, mystery reigned. Old journals speak of travelers heading west and never returning. Some spoke of golden cities hidden in the Rockies, or giant beasts roaming the plains. Stories dismissed as frontier tall tales. But then, decades later, explorers stumbled upon ancient ruins in the Midwest and skeletal remains of animals no one could name. Life 200 years ago moved at the pace of muscle, human or animal. In rural America, families rose with the sun and slept soon after dark, their days ruled by the light of the sky. Homes were built of wood, often by the hands of those who lived in them. The floors were rough boards or packed dirt. In the winter, a single fireplace heated the main room. The bedrooms upstairs often froze overnight, water in the wash basin turning to ice. Cooking was a constant labor. There were no supermarkets. Women and older children churned butter, baked bread, and boiled stews over open flames. Men tended fields from dawn until exhaustion. A single bad harvest could mean hunger for the entire winter. Tools broke often, and replacing them meant weeks of waiting for a blacksmith's work. Cities offered more goods and excitement, but they were also dangerous. Streets were muddy and crowded, with pigs, chickens, and stray dogs roaming freely. The smell of horse manure mixed with the stench of human waste tossed from upper windows. Drinking water came from wells often contaminated with sewage. Disease outbreaks, cholera, yellow fever, smallpox could kill hundreds within weeks. Death was so common that funerals were as routine as church services. Yet, despite the hardships, there was resilience. Families gathered at night to tell stories, sing, and read by candlelight. Life was short, but it was lived face to face, bound by community, and untouched by the isolation of modern screens.
The American diet in 1825 depended entirely on the land, the season, and your location. In the countryside, corn, beans, potatoes, and salted pork were staples. Fresh vegetables were rare in winter. Dried fruit and pickled cabbage might be the only source of vitamins. In wealthier homes, imported sugar, tea, and coffee were luxuries, often stored in locked boxes to keep servants or children from sneaking them. Preservation was a matter of survival. Meat spoiled quickly in the summer heat, so it was salted in barrels, smoked in sheds, or buried in ice cut from frozen lakes. Families would cut massive blocks of ice in January, store them in sawdust-insulated pits, and use them to keep milk drinkable for a few extra days. City taverns served thick stews, fresh bread, and beer. Whiskey flowed freely, sometimes safer than the water. Travelers often carried pocket food, hardtack biscuits so tough they had to be soaked before eating. Diaries mention curious dishes made with plants and animals now vanished, herbs with no modern equivalent, birds long extinct. Were these simply species we've forgotten, or proof of a richer ecosystem destroyed in the rush of industrialization?
If you were sick in 1825, your chances of recovery depended on luck, wealth, and where you lived. In rural areas, midwives and herbalists treated everything from fevers to broken bones. In cities, doctors used treatments now considered deadly: bloodletting to balance the humors, mercury pills for constipation, laudanum, a form of opium for pain, and arsenic for skin problems. Surgery was done without anesthesia, and infection often killed the patient, not the original injury. Native American tribes possessed generations of botanical knowledge: willow bark for pain relief, echinacea for infections, and countless other remedies that modern pharmaceuticals are built on today. Yet much of this wisdom was dismissed by European settlers as superstition until science rediscovered it decades later. Still, there were stranger tales, whispers of resurrection men who claimed to revive the dead, or at least those presumed dead. Some of these were con artists, others left witnesses baffled. Was it advanced knowledge of the body, or something science still can't explain? Historians label these accounts as folklore, but in old diaries written in shaky ink, there are descriptions of healers who could stop bleeding with a touch,
or predict a patient's death within minutes. Coincidence? Or something more? In 1825, America's roads were not roads as we think of them today. They were dirt tracks, rutted, muddy, often washed out after storms. Travel by wagon could be punishing. Wheels broke, horses went lame, and bridges were rare. In many rural areas, a journey of 30 miles could take 2 full days. The fastest means of land travel was horseback. Stagecoaches carried passengers between major towns, but they were cramped, expensive, and uncomfortable. Imagine being packed inside with 6 strangers bouncing over every rock and hole, your face powdered with dust in summer or coated with ice in winter. Rivers were the true highways of the era. Flatboats, keelboats, and newly emerging steamboats moved goods and people faster than any land route. But river travel had dangers: shifting sandbars, storms, and river pirates who preyed on the unprepared. Yes, pirates, not just on the high seas, but on the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. Some were desperate farmers turned robbers. Others were organized gangs. Communication was equally slow. The postal system relied on horseback riders and stagecoaches. A letter from New York to New Orleans could take weeks, even months. There was no guarantee it would arrive at all. News traveled not by instant updates, but by word of mouth, traveling slower than the seasons themselves.
Life 200 years ago also meant living in a nation deeply divided by slavery. In 1825, nearly 1 in every 5 people in America was enslaved, the majority in the southern states. Cotton was king, and human beings were the machinery. Families were torn apart at auctions. Workdays were long, punishments brutal, and escape often meant death if caught. In the North, abolitionist movements were gaining strength, printing pamphlets and holding rallies. But even there, racism was deeply embedded in society, and freed Black Americans faced restrictions on property, voting, and movement. The push for westward expansion, fueled by the idea of manifest destiny, meant that slavery's shadow grew longer. Every new territory added to the Union brought fierce debates over whether it would be free or slave-holding. Native nations were caught in the middle, as settlers, soldiers, and speculators forced them from ancestral lands. And then there were the whispers, claims that some wealthy families in the South were tied to secret societies in Europe, using slavery not just for profit, but as part of a larger plan to control trade routes, resources, and political power in the young republic. Whether truth or rumor, the result was the same. Millions lived and died in bondage, their stories buried under the myths of progress. To understand life in 1825 America, we must step beyond dates and battles. We must smell the wood smoke, feel the frozen water in the basin, hear the rumble of a wagon over muddy ground. This was a nation still raw, still dangerous, still becoming. But it was also a nation layered in secrets, species that vanished without record, maps that hinted at hidden lands, societies that worked in shadows, and cures that modern science still struggles to explain. These truths were not lost, they were buried. If we could walk the streets of 1825 again, we might find them in an old tavern tale, in a dusty journal hidden in an attic, in a forgotten cemetery overgrown with weeds. History is not just what happened, it is what survived the telling. And much of 1825 America did not survive the telling. 200 years have passed. The world is faster, louder, and more connected. But perhaps the greatest mysteries of this young nation still lie not in our future, but in the shadows of its past.
So I ask you, could you survive a single day in 1825? No instant news, no warm houses, no safe streets, no certainty of your next meal. To live with danger, disease, and hardship at every turn, would you embrace it or run back to your fast-moving modern life? The past whispers its secrets, but only the brave will listen. Tell us in the comments, would you choose to live a day in 1825 or stay in your modern world? The choice is yours, and history is waiting for your answer.